All right. Let me introduce myself. My name is up there, Craig Whitney. Everybody wants to know what Church Planting Catalyst is. I work with the Gateway Leadership Initiative, which is the sponsoring organization of today. And my role is to mobilize leaders to start churches that are come as you are churches, as you're learning about today. And so working with church planters across the country, North America, and even in places around the world. Primarily in what we would consider to be, sounds a little bit technical, postmodern, post-Christian people groups. So I would actually say I know very little about starting a church in Southeast Asia. That's a culture I know nothing about. I wouldn't know anything about how you'd go about reaching those people. But Western cultures, which kind of make this weird swipe across the globe from Europe through the United States down to Australia and New Zealand, all Western-based cultures have a lot in common. Especially, kind of at the outer edges, they've become far more post-Christian and postmodern than we are, but we're discovering that our own country culturally is beginning to follow them. And so a lot of things we're learning about how to reach people here are already very relevant about how to reach people there. I want to talk today about how do we mobilize groups to reach their networks. So as you're gathering groups of people who are part of your church, whether it's a small group or whatever we're actually going to talk about what you call it, but as groups of people are forming community inside of your church, how do you mobilize those people so that they're reaching their networks, the people that they are already in relationship with? It might be their neighbors, might be their coworkers, might be their family. People all have a social network around them. How does that group become effective in reaching into those social networks? I'm curious, how many of you in your own church experience have ever been part of a small group, whatever you call it, a group of people that became a holy huddle? How many of you, raise your hand. How many of you have ever been a part of one of those groups? Some of you going, what do I mean by holy huddle? Where we get together, and very quickly it becomes us. So it's kind of our little Christian group against the world. And we don't invite anybody to come. So those of you that don't know what I mean, give me some qualities of a holy huddle. Let's answer it that way. If you've been a part of something you thought was a holy huddle, what was it like? Just describe some characteristics. Inward focused. So it was all about us, who's already here. What else? Some other characteristics. Okay, not really on any mission, right? Self-serving. Okay, anybody else? Characteristics of a group like that. Closed. No other. We're not inviting anybody to come, and if somebody brought somebody, we'd really look at them kind of. What are they doing here? They're not one of us. Anybody else? Other characteristics. Now let's flip this around for a second, right? Because those all kind of sound negative. There are actually some positive characteristics of a group like this. You've been in one. What are the positive characteristics? Close relationships, friendship, okay. Anything else? Authenticity and an ability to really be open about, because you get to know, and it's part of the friendship thing, right? But you can kind of really trust the people that are there. If you've ever been in a group like that and had anything, kind of a tragedy happen in your own life, it's like this extended family. They'll just whoosh, and they'll take care of you. So you just can't believe what people will do to help you out. So I want to be really, we can really easily put this in a super negative light. But what I want to point out, help you see, is there's actually some great characteristics of a group like this as well. How do we, though, keep a group or create groups of people that have some of those positive characteristics without the negative characteristics, that don't become closed, that don't lack mission, that aren't open to new people coming? And I want to try and give you some tips today. I want to really explain to you 3 shifts. And these 3 shifts will help you kind of reorient a group so that it is more focused on reaching its network than just being with each other. The first shift is really a vision shift. We have to change simply how we envision what it means to be part of a group and even what a group is. Answer this question: why does your church have small groups. Okay? Anybody else? Accountability? Okay? It's interesting how we talk about even what the reason a group exists is. And what we have to recognize as leaders is sometimes we unintentionally portray a picture when we describe this group that we didn't mean. Think about the very nature of calling it a small group. What have we just cast as a vision? Small, right? So if you're telling your church, we have small groups, and somebody has a group that all of a sudden has 25 people in it, what do they assume? They're doing something wrong, right? Because the group is supposed to be small. This isn't small. We must be doing something wrong. And so even our language kind of betrays that. And I will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The other thing is, in my experience within church, and I actually did small group ministry. That was my job for almost a decade in church ministry. We really only talked about groups existing for one of two purposes: relationships or spiritual growth. That was, why do we have groups? Well, we want people to be connected. We want them to grow. Are those the only two purposes of the church? They're not, are they? Well, what about evangelism? What about serving? What about worship? The church has more purposes than those two purposes, but we tend to think of groups in this very limited scope of what their purpose is. And that creates for us what I'm going to just call a fragmented approach, both to ministry and ultimately to life, because we have not seen these things in the proper way. Vision gets confused. So you have to think from the person who's hearing this. They're not, what are they hearing? How are they understanding this? They're saying, well, you tell me I need to do this, then you tell me I need to do this, then you tell me I need to do this. That vision becomes confused and fragmented. And when it does, what happens is those things that you're saying, all 5 of these things are really important. The person who hears that ends up, what they end up doing is choosing one of them. They don't have the bandwidth for all 5 of those things. They don't have the space for all 5 of those things. And so they end up saying, well, that one looks good to me. I'll do that one. And so if you think in your own church, right, well, here's this person, man, they've been in a small group forever, but they never serve anywhere. And here's this other person that serves in this ministry, and they're incredibly faithful, and they're there all the time, and they do a lot of great stuff, but they've never connected to a group. Why? They're treating it like a smorgasbord, and they're choosing the thing that kind of fits for them, but it doesn't serve the whole purpose. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we live in a culture in which you just need to assume that every person is overwhelmed and too busy. It's just it's the nature of American life. Maybe there are some places where people don't live that way, but I find that even in whether you big urban city, small rural, everybody's life. That's like the way we do life in America is busy, and so people see all that and go, I don't have time, I don't have space for that. So we need to, from a vision perspective, shift from meeting the need to belong to meeting the needs of the whole person and the whole community. When we cast vision for community, for doing life together, we need to be casting a vision that says, this is for the whole person. This is for you as a whole person. It's not for one part of your life, it's for your whole life. And it isn't just for you, it isn't just for your group, it's for our whole community. We just need to expand the vision of what we're presenting to people. Now, some people, when I talk about this, will say, and this term has entered our language, isn't that missional community? And I don't know what you know or read or studied about missional community. Maybe, yes. I just have one favor to ask. Whatever you do, don't call it missional community. We're going to get to the part, about reaching other people. So I'm part of a missional community, and I want to reach my coworkers. And so I go to my coworker, Joe, and I say, Joe, man, you really got to come with me Tuesday and be part of my missional community. So Joe's not a believer. He has no idea. He really probably doesn't even know what I mean when I say community. He definitely doesn't know what I mean when I say missional. So he's going to ask me, what What mission are you guys on? And my answer is going to be what? Save you. To which Joe is going to say, no thanks, I'm out. I don't want to be there, right? I don't need to be saved. I don't need to be rescued. So you want to do missional community, just don't call it that. Call it something that you could actually invite people to and they would want to come. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So as you're creating a vision, language is really important. I want to put a couple descriptions up here on the screen. Now, I am not going to tell you which churches these are from, but I promise you if I did tell you what churches these are from, you would know exactly where they are. These are high-profile, very prominent mega churches in the United States. You go to their website, you find the link for groups, and this is what you find as a description. Community groups are small groups of adults that meet weekly for friendship, support, and spiritual growth. Members of all ages, stages of life, and spiritual maturity are welcome. Now, what's the vision that is cast for this group? Friendship, right? Maybe a little bit of spiritual growth. Is there anything in that vision that says to me, if I join one of these groups, I'm going to be a part of changing my city? Nothing, right? So now if I want to convince people that they should be reaching their network, I'm going to have to cast additional vision, right? Because it's missing from this vision. Here's another one. This is a big church, and it's really easy to get lost in a large church, going every weekend but never finding your place. That's why we created groups. In a group, you'll meet people who live near you, are in the same stage of life as you, or have similar interests. Again, what's the vision that's cast? Belonging, right? It's like, hey, if I want to belong, I can go to one of these groups and I belong. So if I go and I make some friends and I belong, I've lived out the vision, right? It's not casting a bigger picture of what this is really about. So go home, look at all your website, your documents, you say, how are we describing our groups? What is the picture that we're painting people and the language that we're using to describe our groups? The second thing that I would say that you have to pay attention to is stories. What are the stories that you are telling? And again, stories are hugely powerful one of the great things today is you're getting to listen to a couple of master storytellers, right? When you leave today, you're going to remember a bunch of things, but most of what you're going to remember is going to be because it was conveyed to you in a story that you could connect to and really understand, because both of these guys are brilliant storytellers. You, if you want to create culture in your church, have to become a storyteller, and that the kinds of stories you tell really matter. So I probably could have found some samples, but there's no way I could have done that anonymously like I did the quotes. Have you ever seen a story saying, hey, join a small group, that is the story of somebody saying, yeah, I was hanging out and I wasn't connected and I joined this group and now I have a bunch of friends? What's that convey? What's the vision that convey, right? Versus somebody saying, yeah, I was here and my life really didn't seem to have much meaning or purpose, and then I got connected to this group of people and they showed me what my gifts and abilities were, and now I'm involved with them in changing the world. Oh, that's a whole different vision, isn't it? What kind of stories are you telling? That will shape how people perceive what it means to be part of a group and what the purpose of that group is. And lastly, even the symbols. So by the way, culture is created with three things: language, stories, and symbols. So what kind of language are you using? What kind of stories are you telling? What kind of symbols are you using? I want to show you some pictures. And again, this is actually an interesting experiment. Take any word that you want to know what the word means, type it into Google, except instead of looking at what websites come up, click the little images tab and look at what images come up for that word. You'll get some really interesting insights about how the real meaning of words in our culture. So all I did was go to Google, type in small groups, and then switch to images. And this is where I found these images, and I'm not going to, pick on where they actually were. There's a place for you. Now, I'm really going to pick on this one. I'm sorry. Okay? You have to look at this. There's a place for you. There's 4 puzzle pieces. One's disconnected. That one, the implication being you're the one missing puzzle piece that when it connects, right? You have a place, except now we have a complete puzzle of four, right? Us four, no more. How is that conveying there's a place for you? What that picture really says is there's a place for what? One. It's a horrible symbol. I'm sorry. It just really, really is. Next one. Small groups. Join one today. Now, but look at the visual symbol. Not the words, look at the visual. What and how are they arranged? In a circle. Which way are they facing? Inward. Isn't that just like the perfect visual of a holy huddle? Right? So if that's the symbol you're using, that's what you're going to convey about the nature of what a group is. One more. This is actually a picture, right? And pictures kind of tell stories. Here's my question. Now, most of you, come from church. And you look at that picture. Does that look like church small group Bible study? Right? Does that look, right? You go, yeah, okay, that looks like that. How many of your unbelieving friends would want to go to that party? Right? I'm not taking that picture to my neighbors and say, hey, come over on Tuesday night. Because the answer is going to be what? No, man, I'm not interested. And so these symbols matter. So let me give you, now, these aren't necessarily great examples, but let me show you some things that are at least headed in a different direction. The next one up. Right? Now, we've got four here, except where's the orientation? Every direction, right? Okay, that's at least, in my mind, better, right? Hey, let's come together and go do something. Maybe not perfect, but I think it's better than where the arrows all point in, right? How about this picture? They're serving, right? Now, wouldn't that at least be, if I at least go to my neighbors and say, hey, we're going to go do that on Saturday, and they may be busy and have other things to do, but that's actually more interesting than the picture before, isn't it? Right? They'd be a lot more like, oh, yeah, I could come do that with you. And so just recognize that the language you use, the stories we tell, the symbols that we picture really are powerful in how we shape vision and create culture. And so one of the reasons that your groups may be inward focused is that you are unintentionally casting a vision for inward focused groups. And so you've just got to change the way that you're casting vision so that people begin to understand and see them differently. Here's the second shift that I think is really important. And it's a strategy shift. And there's two elements to this. The first thing I want to talk about is a shift from groups that are the ideal size to care to groups that are the ideal size to go. Let me say it again. Groups are the ideal size to care to groups that are the ideal size to go. Does anybody know where small groups came from in the history of the evangelical church in America? Anybody know? Anybody here know the history? Okay, so let me just take you on a short history thing so you can even kind of understand. Really? What's that? No. It goes back to the 70s, and so prior to the 70s, most churches in America were of the size of around 100 people. And they had a single pastor who functioned as the shepherd of all of the people in the church. In the 70s, the American church began to see growth, and there were churches that started to grow from 100 to 200 to 500 to 1,000, and many of them still had, because it was the way we'd done church for hundreds of years, they still had one pastor. Well, now one pastor was being expected to care for hundreds of people. Is that doable? No. So the problem that we were trying to, how do we care for all of these people when we only have one pastor? And so the idea was, well, let's create groups where people can get together in smaller groups, and let's appoint shepherds or under shepherds over those groups so that those people can be cared for. Kind of the Moses, reduce the span of care. Right? And so historically, we kind of have this idea that groups were formed to be a place of caring, and thus what size did they end up being? What is the ideal size for a group of people to care for one another? 12. And that's why we have groups of that size. Now, group size matters. Are you familiar with the work of Edward Hall or socialnomics? Anybody familiar with this? You may be when I begin to say. He was an architect in the 50s who began to study how people interacted socially in various spaces. And what he actually defined was this thing of proximity. And so he began to look at how people interacted with each other in terms of distance and then carry that over into architecture. So if you are in an intimate relationship with someone, what is the space that defines, the distance of space that defines your relationship? Nothing, right? So think of a spouse, a child. If you have an intimate relationship with someone, are you uncomfortable with them touching you? Not at all, right? You're actually almost more comfortable if you are touching them. That defines the relationship. If you have a close personal relationship with someone, but not necessarily an intimate relationship. So think of, a friend, a coworker that you might spend a lot of time with. What's the space that you're comfortable with? It's usually 12 to 18 inches, right? You guys are all at the same church. You all saw it at this little, I don't know what, 2-foot big table, and you're all close to it. But are you uncomfortable being that close to each other? No. I'm guessing you guys know each other too, right? You sat. Now look at where the rest of you did. Why? Because none of you know each other. And so you made space. Social space is usually a few feet, right? And so, now there's this weird idea when we get into really compact urban settings, if you like get on the subway in a place like Paris or London, right? But even then, there's like this social protocol that says what? I may be touching everyone around me, but what do I do with my eyes? I do not make eye contact with anyone. That's the way I maintain social space. And then there's a public space, which is kind of how you default organized yourselves in here, even though this group isn't really enough to be public, which is you're all facing me. The assumption being that we're together in this place, and so there's a common thing that we're all focused on, and we're really not here to interact with each other at all. And so we can kind of ignore each other while we're paying attention to whatever is up front. Well, Edward Hall studied that in terms of distance and architecture, but all you have to do is go one step further than that and realize that architecture then makes space for various sizes of people, right? That table only imposes space and thus determines the size of group that can sit around that table. This room creates a space that when you came in here caused you to sit like it was public space, even though the group is smaller than that because the room's big enough to hold hundreds of people. And when there's hundreds of people, that's public. So when you have groups of 8 to 10, 12 people, I can almost guarantee, go to any group. How do they arrange themselves? In a circle, right? Because that's the social space. What types of rooms do they typically meet in? Right? Most often, we're meeting in somebody's home. And one of the interesting things, depending on your culture, is that in and of itself becomes another barrier, right? Because if I don't know how many of you are comfortable going to somebody's house where you don't know the person whose house it is? But that's a big leap, right? So we create that. So recognize that group size matters. Now, a group of 8, 10, 12 people is a perfect size to care for each other because we all know each other and we can all keep track of what's happening in all of our lives all the time. How easy is it for a group of 8, 10, 12 people to change the world? Hard. Why? Not enough resources, not enough manpower to really get much done. Now make that group a group of 30 people. Now what can you get done? A lot more. And they're willing to take on a lot more because they look around and they go, yeah, we could do that. And they look around room of 8 and go, we can't do that. There's no way. That's too much for us. So group size really matters. So think about using shift from groups that are the ideal size to care to the ideal size to go, which will be much more like 20, 25 or larger. The second thing is move from a steady beat to a simple rhythm. Let me try and explain what I mean by this. Again, in the typical church, in the typical small group, what is the schedule? Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, right? Or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever the day of the week it is. Same place, same time. Am I the only one to remember same bat channel? Somebody else in the room is old enough to remember that. And that's just the way we do group. Now, I'm not a drummer, but, is anybody a drummer? Right? That's like I got a drum kit. I'm just doing this on the kick, right? Now, how many of you would want to go listen to a drummer or a band or any kind of music that this is all there was, right? But that's how we do group very often. We just have this steady beat. The problem is then I say to you, okay, have a holistic purpose, have different, and then you immediately, I don't know, how's that all going to work? Well, part of how it's going to work is you're going to make a strategic shift from steady beat to simple rhythm, right? Boom, boom, boom. That's not, I'm not a drummer, and that's not very complicated, is it, right? But I just got two more things in, didn't I? I got from just boom to that's two more things. Simple rhythm. Now, a couple things about rhythm. Rhythm is really important because in this context, rhythm is what tells people what's next. Right? Now, okay, if there's no drummers, are there any dancers in the room? You can't all be Southern Baptists. Really? I don't dance either, so I'm really not going to dance for you, right? And each count has a step, right? And so if you watch a dance, for like minutes, you think, how in the world do you remember what to do when? Well, it's not that complicated, right? Because you're not remembering 10 minutes worth of something. You're not even remembering 2 minutes worth of something. What are you remembering? Just a series of steps. And once you learn those steps, you just do them over and over and over again. And it's not that hard. And so you can build into group life, instead of this steady beat, a simple rhythm. So let me give you some examples. A church that we've worked with that's in Kansas started recently. And so the great part, and I will talk about this in a little minute here, when you start a church, one of the great things is you get to create all this stuff from scratch. So you don't have to change what is, you just get to create what you want it to be. And so this church, I was like, I want to have this approach to groups, so what's it going to look like? Their groups meet every week. So in a 4-week month, the groups would be together 4 times. 2 of those times look like a pretty stereotypical small group kind of thing. They meet in somebody's home, they have a Bible study, they pray for each other, they do that. It kind of looks like that. One of those times, they throw a party. Just whatever, not like full-on 6th Street party, but they make sure they're doing something fun, something that involves food, something that you can invite any of your friends to, and your friends would go, yeah, I'll go do that. They have a party every month. They also, once a month, have a time that they get together to serve. And so they work to resource their groups with, some kind of serving thing. Some of their groups have already adopted kind of serving things that they serve at consistently. Some of their groups are just doing more random things, and they'll have to figure that out as they go. But now they've built all that stuff into the life of one group. So now they don't have to say to a person, hey, you should go to a group, and you should be having parties with your unbelieving friends, and you should be serving, right? You just need to be part of this community, and you get to do all 3. And so you just move from this simple beat or from the single beat to a simple rhythm. And so 2 really key things that you can do. Now let me say this. If you have an existing small group structure that is fairly stereotypical, right? So you've got a whole bunch of small groups that people are in that are 8 to 12 people, and they meet every week for Bible study. Please do not go back to your church and say, we're going to change everything about how we do small groups. For a couple, right? One, you'll wreck it. You'll break the machine is really what you'll end up doing. You just break the system, and you'll end up with nothing instead of what you have. And that means you really won't get people where you want them to go. So if you've got existing small groups, you've got to think about how to make shifts subtly. So think about how to cast a vision for a couple of your groups to get together and serve once a month. Don't say, you got to stop meeting as a group. Just say, hey, man, who are a couple of my group leaders that are good friends with each other? They get along well. Maybe I could get them to do a serve thing together once a month. Or, maybe I could get these couple of groups to have a vision for throwing party, right? Just just insert little elements and help them move slowly and catch this new vision. Don't wreck it. Now, if you're starting from scratch, if you're a church planner, then you have that freedom. Figure out, how do we build a simple rhythm, what size, and figure all that and build the right structure from the beginning. So you have a little more freedom there, but don't wreck what you have to try and make this happen overnight. The last thing I want to talk about as a shift is a resource shift. And this is what I want to suggest here, that you shift from study guides to activity guides. I did small groups for a long time, and I'm actually going to show you a discussion. Study guide is, we've got a book, or we've got the Bible, and we've got some questions, and we sit around and we talk about the questions, right? Are you aware that that's like the worst way to learn? Even if your goal is growth, that's the worst way to get it. Because I talk about it, and then I go home and do what? Forget about it. Nothing changes. It's just not the way we learn. Replace the question, what are we going to study, with the question, what are we going to do? Incredibly simple shift, but it will change everything. Go from what are we going to study to what are we going to do. If you really want people to become like Jesus, you don't invite them to read the things that he said. You invite them to do the things that he did. That's the shift. Just start inviting people to do what Jesus did instead of talking about what Jesus said. Now, we created something, and you guys got this book today, so you at least have a significant part of what I want to show you. John wrote this book, Mud in the Masterpiece, about a year ago. And interesting, the book is in two halves. In the first half of the book is about the attitudes of Jesus. The second half of the book is about the actions of Jesus. And because we realize if we want people to become like Jesus, we've got to change their attitudes, their heart, and their actions. If we don't change their actions, then we haven't actually changed anything at all. That ultimately, that's what needs to happen. And so John was working on the book, and we were thinking about how do we really get people to do that? We created some resources to go with it. Now, one of the things that we did is we created a discussion guide. And if you read this discussion guide, you go, yeah, that looks like a lot of the Bible studies I've used in my small groups and in my church experience. It'll look pretty familiar. We did do one thing in it, in that there's 6 sessions in here as you work your way through the book. Every section is broken up into 3 pieces. A connect, so you get together and you spend some time talking about what's going on with the other. A discuss, where you discuss what's in the book. But every session ends with, anybody want to guess? Do. So even though it's a discussion guide, every discussion ends with go do. And when you get back together next week, guess what you discuss? What you did, right? So we're focusing not just on discussion, but on activity. But we want to take that a step further because we recognize that, okay, they're going to read this book, and they're going to talk about it, and they're going to do a few things over 6 weeks. Anybody ever tried to make a significant change in their life? Like a habit, like I don't exercise, I'm going to exercise. I'm overweight, I want to lose weight, I need to eat better. Can you make one of those changes in 6 weeks? If you succeed, I want to know how you did it. Now, some of you might go, well, yeah, I started, and maybe you actually made a lot of progress, and you're like, yeah, it's 2 years later, and I'm still doing it. Well, yeah, but for the most part, those changes don't happen in that short a period of time. If we're really going to make lifestyle change, it happens over a long period of time. We can make progress in 6 weeks, but we don't really see the fruit of that lifestyle change for more like 6 months in our lives, to where it really becomes ingrained in us. And it's like I reached a point, I'll turn 50 this year, and about 5 years ago I turned 45. Like, hey, exercising when somebody comes up with something fun to do isn't cutting it anymore. Right? When I was in my 30s, I just go, somebody said, let's go play softball. I go play softball. Let's go. All that happened when I got to be 45 was that meant I couldn't walk the next day because I was so sore. I think I need to start exercising on a regular basis, not just maybe once a month. I'm getting too old to not do that. 5 years later, it's still really, I'm still not to where it's an ingrained habit in my life that happens like clockwork. That's 5 years later or 4 years later. I'm still trying to keep that habit that I wanted to put in my life. Change is really, really hard. So how do we do that? And so we created this thing that we call an action guide. And so this is what it looks like. And I'm going to put this up on the screen here just to show you what it is. Think of this way. This is like a book, and now I can't remember the count. There's 40, I think. What I will call exercises in here. You go to the gym, you want to get in shape, and you got different exercises. There's just 40 exercises. Now, they are progressive, and what I mean by that is they go from kind of easier and start with people who maybe aren't very connected to unbelieving friends or really aren't doing anything in their life to reach out, to things that are really get kind of tough. And certainly you wouldn't want to start with the harder ones if you're not already engaged with unbelieving friends. You wouldn't even be able to. You wouldn't even have anybody to do the exercises with. But I just want to give you an example of how we put these together so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about in this shift from discuss to do. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This just shows you what they look like. So this is a real simple exercise that we created. It actually came from a guy that used to be on staff here at Gateway, was a friend of mine, called Walk, Don't Wave. So here's the scenario. How many of you will come into your neighborhood, the place you live, maybe even your workplace, you see someone that you sort of know? Like for me, I live in a very typical suburban neighborhood. So I'll come into my neighborhood, pull into my driveway, get out of my car, and one of my neighbors will be outside. What do? I wave at them and do what? Walk into my house. Guess what that means I don't do? I don't have any conversation with them. I'm not doing anything to build any relationship with them. Right? That's my habit. How do I change that habit? Walk, don't wave. So now, when I come into my neighborhood and I see one of my neighbors outside, I get out of my car and what do? I walk. Now, what do I do when I get there? I know this sounds really stupid, and that's what you'll see here. As like over-the-top simple as this sounds, there's actually instructions in here about what to do when you get there. Because a lot of people go, well, what am I going to say to my neighbor when I get there? Well, one of the first things you may need to say to your neighbor is, hi, my name is Craig, because you may have lived next to that person for 5 years and you don't know their name and they don't know yours. Get over it. Go introduce yourself. That's the first thing you'll have to do. Second thing is, okay, now we've gotten past names, what's next? Ask a question about their life, Find something to ask about. Now, here's the really significant thing, is to get to where you're asking questions about what's going on in their life so that when you see them the next time, you don't go to them and ask them a random question. You have to remember, hey, the last time we met, you told me about something that was going on at work, something with your kids, something else, and I come up to you and I say, hey, Scott, what happened with, right? Now, I'm actually acting like the person who knows and cares about Scott. By the way, Scott lives 2 houses over from me, and he's actually an outside salesperson. So he drives a company car, and he is meticulous about that car because it's his calling card when he comes into places. So he's my neighbor who's actually outside all the time because he washes his car like 3 times a week. It's why they gave him a black car, I'll never understand. It is a company car, but anyway. But, so I go say hi, and he says things about work, and I come back a few days later, and I can, right? I'm just being a good neighbor, right? But how many people who are following Jesus aren't even being good neighbors to the people who live 2 doors over, right? And that's why I said these exercises are progressive, right? This is actually in the middle, believe it or not. This isn't even easy, because this actually isn't easy. Because if you're really going to do this, this will totally change your lifestyle to do this. Now imagine if you have a small group of people, right, 8, 12 people, and every one of them starts doing this. Just think about that for a minute. Now all of a sudden you have someone in that group coming on, let's pick Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and we get to the typical small group prayer time. What do you guys want to pray about? And all of a sudden somebody in the group goes, hey, you guys pray for my neighbor Scott? I was talking to him yesterday, and da-da-da-da is going on in his life. Whatever. Someone passed away, or someone's sick, or, right? Or, he lost his job. I mean, it could be all kinds of things. Now think about how did that happen? How did that come about, right? Because somebody walked instead of waving. Now all of a sudden this group is not inward focused, it's starting to be outward focused. Now we come back a week later and someone else in the group says, hey, what happened with your neighbor Scott? We're starting to express care. Now, if we've built some of these rhythms in and, we throw a party or we do a serve thing, right? And I'm going to invite my neighbor Scott. Now, you do have to teach your people that when Scott comes, they shouldn't all come rushing up to him, right? Hey, I heard your mom passed away. I'm really sorry. That's like totally not cool. But when they do meet Scott, they're like, I know who this is, right? This is Bill's neighbor. We prayed for this guy. Man, instead of feeling like, who's this stranger invading my group? All of a sudden I feel like, man, this is really cool. Bill brought his friend. We've been praying for him. One, insanely simple exercise that could reorient a way a group thought about its circle and its network. Now, when you come back, and we put this in here. Now, a couple pieces that we put in. One of the things we put in is this act. It's like this covenant that you do with your group. So if you're using this in a small group, the group all commits, right? For the next, week, 2 weeks, month, people say, I'm in. I'm going to do this, right? When I see someone, and they can, my neighborhood, my work, because sometimes that varies, right? You got somebody that lives out in the country on 40 acres and say, yeah, every time I see my neighbor, I'm going to walk. And they'll come back a month later, I haven't seen anybody. So that doesn't work. They got to pick an appropriate place. Ask them to keep track of how many times they walk in that daily routine. Keep a little tally. How many times have I done that? But then when you come back together as a group, you ask the hard questions. What did you find most difficult about walking instead of waving? Now, the first thing is somebody in the group is going to go, well, I didn't do it, right? That creates accountability. Other people will talk about why they were uncomfortable. What was the most interesting conversation you had? How would incorporating this habit in your daily life increase your opportunities to be like Jesus with the people around you? So you just get your group talking about it. It creates accountability, and then you just work through that process. So, again, back to the shift. This is a great resource. Use it, but it's not limited to this. Go back to the shift. The shift is just not asking what are we going to do instead of what are we going to study. And you can shift the way that people will think about that. All right, I want to give you some time for questions. I actually have a question for you, first of all, because some of you are doing these. Does anybody know, or is anybody using any kind of action-oriented curriculum like this in their small group? What? Okay. But is it like this where everything's got go and do type of things? Okay, great. Yeah, awesome. So there's missional essentials. I'm not familiar with it, but I'm sure you can Google that and find it and figure it out. Anybody else using anything else like that? Because I don't want to sound like this is the only answer. The other people are probably thinking the same way, and it's just finding things that are action-oriented that you can use in your group. Any other questions? Questions that I've been talking for a long time. So, yeah. There's going to be a little bit of an art form to this. My immediate answer will be to say the sooner the better. But there is a certain element of it. You have to be careful of it not being too soon, especially depending on how high you raise the expectation. So I'm actually starting a new small group Wednesday. The first meeting of our new small group when I get home next Wednesday. And one of the commitments that we have is we want to be encouraging people in the group to be doing. But truthfully, probably all I will say on Wednesday is, hey, as our group gets going, there's some things we're going to be doing together. Right. Yeah, I'm not going to tell them to go do walk, don't wave on the first Wednesday, right? That's what I said. That's too soon. But right, right. And so that's what I'm saying. As I'm envisioning that, I'll say something about that in week one, but it'll just be, hey, that's part of what we're going to do. We haven't planned anything necessarily yet, but we're going to be doing things together. Now, my co-leader actually leads within our church one of our outreach ministries that serves a monthly breakfast at one of the homeless missions in our area. And so I'm pretty sure our first activity will actually be to all go fix breakfast together. And so, we'll figure out what the date of that is. And so then, hey, I'll let Brian lead on it. Hey, this is the day we want you all to come and do that together. So we'll probably do something where we serve as a group first before we would start implementing these kinds of things. My point about early, though, is you don't want to take a group of people and spend a whole year creating this great, intimate, holy huddle, and then all of a sudden decide, oh, by the way, we want to do stuff. Well, again, if your group is stuck, and that's kind of the model that it's in, then you just have to begin to introduce things in small steps, in gradual steps. So don't try and take them from kind of holy huddle to, man, we're all changing the world together in 1 week. Figure out one thing that you could do to introduce it. Hey, wouldn't it be great if we actually did something together to help other people? Maybe and just introduce an idea, move them that way. Think about introducing, even if you're kind of in a study pattern, just think about as a leader intentionally introducing into the study a do element as a part of every conversation. Say, hey, we talk about this stuff all the time, but it's really important that we do it. So every week we're going to start talking about making a commitment. And it doesn't that initial do thing doesn't even have to be missional, so to speak. It's just introducing the idea that, hey, being part of this group is that we're going to make commitments to do, not just discuss. And so you just begin to lead people in that direction. Right. Right. And I would say if you're introducing do into an existing group, the follow-up assess is probably more critical than the choice of the do exercise. So you'll have a tendency when I got to find just the right thing to ask them to do. It's kind of if you don't exercise at all and you decide I need to exercise, does it actually matter what you exercise? I mean, other than not overdoing it, right? Walking around the block becomes a good thing, right? So it's not like, I got to come up with this genius exercise. No, you just got to go do. And so the key becomes having the conversation, the assess afterwards. Did you do it? What did you learn from it? What positive things? So that you're building on the success and the win of people actually doing it. That's, in my mind, far more important than coming up with exactly the right thing to go ask them to do. Okay. Honestly, I don't even want to try. What I think is effective is that you build in a rhythm. Uh, you have to assess in your own context and with your own people what the right rhythm is. So I would not feel, I don't know that I wouldn't feel, okay, well, I just don't know enough about your setting to try and say that's good or bad. It's impossible. I'd have to know way more information. What I think is great, though, is that you're creating rhythm. You haven't assumed this steady beat mindset, and so you're able to introduce different elements into the life of the group and emphasize. So you're emphasizing prayer, right? By having a night that's focused on prayer. That's great. I like that. You're emphasizing serving. So I don't know. I just don't want to get trapped in saying that's right, but what I like is the rhythm, that it isn't steady beat. Yeah, I like that it's rhythm. That's a rhythm, and I like that. I think that in the long run will be more effective than steady beat. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for coming, hanging out.